All right, so we're on to some event-driven programming 2 here. So I have a little bit more complicated thing to show you. It'll be sort of a digital clock style thing. And then we're going to talk about how we can get interaction with the GUIs that we make in Scene Builder. So it's going to be slightly different in terms of how we get access to the elements, like how do we know that there's buttons and text and all that sort of stuff in a Scene Builder scene. And then the interaction itself is going to be sort of similar in that we're going to use anonymous classes, or we're going to use lambdas or something to actually get the interaction in there. So it's just a slightly different process that is sort of relatively easy to do once you get used to it. All right, so first, I want to talk about the sort of JavaFX animation class, and I'm not going to do this to do like sprite animation or something, but it does have that capability. It has things like path transitions for moving along a path. It has various sort of fade things as well to change the opacity of an image over time, and then there's a timeline class that sort of supports sort of general sort of keyframe animation. During lab this week, I'm going to show you the use of the animation class to make a sort of a bouncing ball thing. So this ball will sort of bounce around the edges of the window that we create. And it's how you can get sort of real-time sort of motion in a program that you might want to make in say a game you might want to make. It'll be very similar to what I'm going to show you with this sort of digital clock thing. It's going to be the same sort of style, but I'll point out a few sort of extra pieces to it. So let's make the digital clock thing now. I have the code on the next slide, so it is sort of there available to you. But I'm going to go through sort of each piece of it. So I have an empty sort of JavaFX project. There's sort of nothing else in here except for main with the launch, and then we have the start here that doesn't have anything associated with it. So I don't even really have a GUI yet. So let's create a. It doesn't matter what pane we use. Let's make a border pane. I'm going to do a border pane, and I'm just going to call it pane, and this will be a new border pane. And this particular example we're going to do is it has a lot of stuff we have to import. So of course we're going to import the sort of the main things, and usually it's going to be JavaFX stuff. I think there's one thing in this particular code that's not going to be from JavaFX, and you'll just sort of understand why when we use it. But the rest of it will be JavaFX related things. Let's set the pane. Let's do something with the pane here. Let's set the center. Actually, let's do that in just a moment. Let's create a text object because we're going to have a text object represent our digital clock. So let's do that. Let's create a text object that I'm just going to call text. This is going to be a new text. And we can set some position stuff in the constructor if we want to. So we can be like, all right, I want it at 50, 50. So 50 pixels, sort of positive Y, positive X. And for now, let's make it just an empty string. Again, this is just one of the possible constructors. We could have used a different one and then set the position and the text in our code. Again, we need to make sure to import text. And then let's do pane.setCenter. I'm going to show you what setCenter does here. So setCenter says the node is placed in the center of this border pane. So it's whatever node we put in here. Well, we have a node called text. So if I say set center, I'm going to say I want the text to be centered in the node. So there's ways that you can sort of set positions and set things in the center of other things to help you align stuff the way that you want to. Let's get to the point where we can actually display something. So let's create a scene. I'm just going to call it scene. And this will be a new scene. And we're going to put the pane in here, and let's have this be 200 by 200. And then we'll make sure to import scene. Now, this is sort of equivalent to adding the sort of children stuff that you've seen before. We're putting the text in the center part of the border pane. That's what we're doing here. So you'll sort of see how that works here in just a second. Let's do the primary stage stuff. So primary stage dot, let's set the title first. And we'll call this digital clock. And then we'll do primary stage dot set, missed an R here, go, dot set scene. And we'll put the scene in. And then we'll do primary stage dot show. So this should get us to where we at least have a window popping up. It'll be 200 by 200, and currently there's nothing in it because we don't have any text. We just have an empty, just an empty string. All right, so let's create an anonymous class, and I'm going to do this sort of separate because I don't want to sort of clutter stuff up too much. So if you want to create an anonymous class that is this is going to sound kind of weird. We're going to create an anonymous class that has a name, and that might not really make sense, but hopefully after you see it in action, it will. Remember that event handler action event is a interface. It's not a class. It's not something we can instantiate. But I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call it EH for event handler. And I'm going to say new event handler action event. And I'm going to put a couple parentheses here. I'm going to make sure to import everything. So let me make sure to do that. Be nice if I spelled this one right. Go. Make sure to import it from JavaFX. Same with action event. Now, you normally can't do this. And if I just put a semicolon here, it's going to complain. It's going to say, hey, you can't instantiate this. But remember what we do with anonymous classes. We put our curly brackets and a semicolon. Now I've created an anonymous class. It has a name, so it's not really anonymous, but I'm naming sort of the variable that contains this stuff. I'm not really creating a class. I don't have a file that I've created that implements event handler and has all that stuff. So yes, I'm giving it a name, but it's still an anonymous class. So I understand how that might sort of seem kind of weird. Now I'm going to put my cursor between the two brackets here and press enter, so I have some space here. And then I'm going to hover over this and say add unimplemented methods, and there's my handle method. So it's exactly the same thing that we were messing around with before. This is where I'm going to have this essentially, let me put a comment in here. This will run every, let's say every 1 second. So every second, I'm going to run this method. And I'm going to show you how I do that. Right now, it doesn't run every second. But I'm going to show you how I do that in just a second with the timeline class. So assuming that this is going to run every second, let's grab let's create an object. And it's going to be called, I'm just going to call it like DT for date and time. But the type of object is local date time. This is just something that's built into Java. I'm going to call it DT for like date time. And this is going to be a, we're not going to create a new one of these. We're actually just going to use a static function call. So we're going to use the class name, local date time dot now. Now is static. And it basically gives back what is the time now. Now that one is imported just from Java time. So it's not a JavaFX related thing. This is just a standard thing that you can do for Java. So we got the time now, the date and time now, DT. Now let's use that to set the text. We have this text variable. So let's set the text. We'll say text.setText, and we'll put a string in here. So I'm going to start with string.format. So we can do a sort of a printf style thing. And we're going to put some numbers in, a %d, and then a colon, and maybe like a %02 d, so we get 2 digits, and then another colon and a %02d, so again we get 2 digits. And then I suppose I don't think we need anything else. We don't need any sort of end thing, no new line, nothing like that. And then I need to put the args in. Now, this is something you'd have to look up if you didn't sort of know how to deal with it, but it would be sort of DT, that date and time, dot get hour. So the hour will be the first int that comes in. And then we'll do DT dot get minute. And then we'll do DT dot get second. Now, there's other ones in here too. We could put the date with this. We could get the month and the day and the year and all that kind of stuff. But this DT just has a bunch of stuff in here, a bunch of getters to get these particular values. So that's what our string will look like. This does do to a 24-hour time. unless you mess around with the get hour. So if you'll see what time I'm recording this here in just a second, because this will be the actual time. But if it was in the afternoon, it would be 24-hour time, and you'd have to mess with this number to make sure you could get it to 12-hour time. And that's it for the action event here. We're just going to grab the local time, essentially get it into an object, and then set our text to the hour, minute, second, sort of formatted in a nice way. Now here comes the animation stuff. And this is the same thing that we will do inside of our inside of the sort of bouncing ball game that we do later this week. So I'm going to say timeline. This is a class from timeline like this. This is a class from JavaFX, and I'm just going to call this T. Sure, timeline T. This is going to be a new timeline, as you might expect. And inside of here for this timeline constructor call, I'm going to create a new keyframe. And inside the constructor for the new keyframe, I'm going to use this class called duration. I'm going to say duration.millis. See the millis here? Duration.millis. And I'm going to put in 1,000. 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. What do I want to do every 1 second? EH. That's what this is saying. So this is saying that I'm creating this sort of timeline thing, which comes from JavaFX animation. And I'm creating a new keyframe, so a new sort of position to do something, comes from JavaFX animation. And the duration on this between each keyframe is 1,000 milliseconds, 1 second. And what I am going to do every 1 second is EH. What does EH do? It grabs the current time and changes the text. So that's why this function will run every 1 second, because it's part of this keyframe that is running in this timeline. Now, I didn't have to import duration, but you might have to. It depends on whether your Eclipse is being helpful or not. Duration comes from JavaFX as well. There are other duration classes, just like a lot of these. Make sure you import the JavaFX version. The non-JavaFX versions don't have this millis. So if you get an error on millis here that says it doesn't exist, then delete whatever import you have for duration and then re-import it with the JavaFX version. Now we need to, this just sets it up. This doesn't actually start playing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this timeline, and I'm going to say set cycle count. And we're going to use timeline.indefinite. So it's going to play forever. I'm not saying, play this 10 times or play this 100 times. I'm just saying play forever. Play until we stop the program, essentially. And then we do T, my timeline.play. So we're going to show the window. Then we're going to create the timeline with a new keyframe every second that will run our event handler. Set the cycle count to indefinite. It'll run forever, and then we're going to play it. So what we should get, run this, we should get our time. Notice that every second it goes up, because that's the way we set it. We set it for changing every second. So every time it gets a time, it's better. So you can sort of tell so you can tell it's just before 11 a.m. when I'm doing this recording. So that's the idea of using this sort of animation and timeline class. Again, you're going to see more of this, because any of the real-time stuff that we create, we're going to use this method to do it. So that should be helpful for whatever sort of final project you're looking to do. If you want some sort of a tick or something, every certain amount of time you need to do something. Update a position, play a sound, update a clock, whatever it is that you need to do. This will do it. Typically, in a game that, say, like a video game that runs 60 frames a second, for instance, that's about 16 milliseconds. So if I put in 16 in here, that would run at about 60 frames a second. We would be updating, or essentially running, this handle function 60 times a second if I set my duration to 16 milliseconds. So that's the idea here. All right, so yeah, so that should give you a little bit of a start, and then later this week we'll look at a few other things related to this as well. All right, so I'm back to the slides. And here's the code. I think it's slightly different. I name things a little bit differently. And here I do use 12-hour time, and I put an AM or PM in, just using a couple of sort of if statement type stuff and doing a mod 12 on the hour. So you can look at that as well, but this should be pretty close to what I just coded. All right, so let's use Scene Builder. If you want to use Scene Builder to make your GUI, there's an extra step. We essentially need to extend application like we already do, but we need to implement initializable. That's the first thing to do. So we extend application, implement initializable. We create our fxml file, and we open it up in Scene Builder and mess around with it. We've done a little bit of this before. This has some of the text about using some, setting a controller class and stuff, and we're going to do that sort of live here. But I do have a couple of slides that sort of show some of that process, sort of show some of this little starter code thing, a little GUI you make, what you do with the GUI. But I'm going to go over that all sort of live, and then we'll code up the ability to do something with that GUI once we have it all coded. So let's hop over. I should have sort of an empty, at least a mostly empty class here. Yeah, it's this one. No, this be my other one here. There we go. So yeah, so I have this one here. This is basically our same one that we messed around with before. So it has this yay and this click me. I do get a little error. You notice down here, it's just a warning. It's saying that my JavaFX sort of version is higher than my Java version, and so it has it's not really a conflict. It's not going to cause any problems, but it does complain about it a little bit. But it's not going to cause any issues. All right, so there is something I changed in here from what we previously did. If you have your version of the code that we messed around with, we just put root in here, root fxml, and the actual root folder or the actual root file over here on the left was actually in the source folder. So let me move that over. So it actually sort of looked like this. If I close down the application package, it is just right here. It's just in the source folder. But if we want this to work properly with Scene Builder and have interaction in our buttons or our text or whatever we're doing with our Scene Builder, then whatever class you intend to run the GUI with, it needs to be in the same folder. So I need to take my root file and move it in here, move it into application, so it's in the same place as main. But if I run this now, I'm going to get an error with this because it can't find this file anymore because it's looking in source and it's not there anymore. So I need to make sure that this path is correct. So this looks directly in source. So I need to go into application / and then it's the root fxml. So if you move where the fxml file is, you need to make sure that that's reflected here. So that's a quick note. So now it will be able to find it. Make sure that's saved, and there we go. So now we have it. So let's have this do something when we click. I think in the slides I have it generate a random number and print that random number here. Now right now we can't really do much of anything with it. We don't have access to the button. We don't have access to the text. We don't have access to anything. So we can't create an event handler or something because we need a reference to the button and to the text from that Scene Builder file. So to do this, we need to create a tag, so an @fxml, and then whatever items you want to use in your Scene Builder scene that you created. So we want a button that I'm going to call my button, and another one @fxml, and we want a text, my text. Now, of course, I need to import stuff. So the tag fxml, it needs to be imported. The button we're going to import, and the text we're going to import. So make sure you get all those imported. Now I have references to my button and my text, but we have to hook them up to the Scene Builder scene. So we have to open up our fxml file in Scene Builder. So I'm just going to right click on it and say open in Scene Builder. You could also open it manually. You could open Scene Builder and then load this one in. But there's my yay and there's my click me. The first thing you do is down in the lower left. There's a little bar that should say controller. If you click on that, it brings up all the controller stuff. If we click on one of the things like a text or a button, like this, we want to have the code one up. And let's see, give me a little bit. Sometimes this doesn't always do what we want as far as allowing us to select the actual class. So we're going to mess around with that a little bit. Essentially, we set a controller class in here. That's the class that we want to actually sort of put in the interaction in. And then in the code section, we'll be able to set the identity. So let me actually close this and make sure to save this. It might even be because I hadn't saved it, that stuff wasn't showing up the way I expected. So let's go back. Let's open Scene Builder again with it. And I'm going to open up the controller. And I now have a dropdown. See, there's now a drop-down arrow. And if I click this, click the dropdown, it says application.main. So I'm going to put that in there. So now that class, this one right here, is now going to be my controller for any of the interaction that happens in my Scene Builder scene. Typically, you do need to have at least one @fxml tag in the file in order for Scene Builder to pick it up. And because I hadn't saved, then it hadn't seen it, so that's why it didn't pick it up. Once you set the controller class, then if I click on something like my text here, and make sure this is text, so notice that it's text here. I think when I did this previously, we used a label. So if it is a label, then you can always go grab a piece of text and throw it in there. We need to change the identity. Notice there's a drop down here for identity, and there's two options: my button and my text. Now this is the text, so I need to make sure that I set this to my text. And then for the button, I set it to my button. So there should be these drop downs for you. If there's not, then the Scene Builder is not picking up that controller class. Over here in the controller section, we also see the components as well. My button is a button. My text is a text. Make sure those types are right. Otherwise, you might get an error. And the controller class is application.main. At this point, I'm good to save. I can save this, and then we can go back to the code and start messing around with the button and the text. So back in my code, I have that one additional thing that I have to implement. So right now we just extend application. We need to implement. So implements initializable. That needs to be imported. And then this has a method that we need to implement. So I need to add the unimplemented methods. So it has this initialize method. This is where your interaction goes. So I'm going to say the button and text interaction goes here instead of start. When we were just doing stuff just with the code, we had everything was in start. But now if you're using Scene Builder, the interaction piece goes in initializable. You still create the scene and everything inside of start, but all the interaction is going to go here in this initializable method. All right, so let's actually do something with this. Let's do a my button. So that's my button up here. Dot set on action. So when we click the button, this will be, let's use an anonymous class this time. So this will be a new event handler action event. And we'll do our parentheses and then our open close curly bracket, and then I'll press enter to give myself some space in between those two brackets. And then I'll import stuff here. Looks like I spelled handler wrong, which happens quite often. And then we'll import action event. Make sure you're getting those from JavaFX. Now I should be able to add the unimplemented methods, and there's my handle. So every time we click that button, let's change some of the text. So I'm going to say my text dot set text, and we'll put a string value in there. So let's use string.format, this, and let's print out random number. So it's going to start as yay. We're going to see the yay start, and then we click the button. I want it to say random number and print out some integer. And then in here, for the arguments, we're going to create a new random. let's see. Yeah, let's actually create. We could put it here. It might look a little weird, but this was sort of an easy thing to do. We're gonna create a new random object, and then we're gonna do dot next int and put like a value of 100 in there. So all this is doing, and this needs to be brought in from Java util. So all this is going to do is just is going to create a new random object here and then call next int for that. So that should be fine for our purposes. I think that's what I did in the code on the slides, if I remember correctly. We could create a new random object just up here as well and just use that, but this is perfectly fine. So if I run this now, I get my yay, and then I do the click and don't have anything. Let's check. Let's check that. Format, setting there, set on action. Let's check our scene builder again to make sure. And we might put the controller in there. Everything should be saved. My text, my button. We might set this. No, that should be okay. I got those guys. If you open up the fxml file, you can see all that stuff that we put in. We've got the button. The ID is my button. The ID here is my text, and it has a bunch of information about it, right? Like the text is yay, and the button says click me, and all that kind of stuff. So all that sort of information that we need to know is in that fxml file, and everything looks fine. Just set the text. Try it one more time, then we'll maybe do something a little bit simpler. Oh, there we go. I don't know why it wasn't doing initially. So there's our random number, and as we click it, it changes it. So I don't know. I didn't actually do anything. I mean, I resaved the stuff from Scene Builder, so maybe I hadn't done that. So yeah, so that is our sort of changing of that text. We could set the size, make it smaller or whatever, and then you sort of do whatever you want, do whatever sort of normal interaction that you want to see. We could do stuff to the console, print stuff to the console if we wanted to. We could change what the button says, anything that we need to do. The point here is hooking up the button or in the text or any other objects that you have in Scene Builder to your actual code. And that happens through the controller class and through this FX ID fields for the dropdown, and those have to be at fxml tags above them. Those have to have that, and we have to implement initializable. And you have to make sure that the fxml file is in the same folder, the same location as the class that you want to do this stuff in. So that's it for the sort of differences between the sort of regular coding stuff and using Scene Builder to create your scenes. So just some slight differences, not too big a deal. It can cause a little bit of confusion because stuff's not happening in start and you're doing this stuff in initialize and you have to have this sort of tag. So it can be a little bit confusing if you're sort of first starting out messing with this stuff. But sort of make a decision for your final project as to what you want to use and sort of try and stick with it. I've had folks sort of change midstream as well, sort of realize that maybe Scene Builder wasn't going to work for what they wanted to do, or at least it was going to be a little bit more complicated to do, and they sort of switched to just sort of hard coding or sort of programming the layout themselves. That's a reasonable thing to do as well. But you should be able to do basically the same stuff in sort of either method. All right, so all that is in sort of text here, talking about, under code, set the FX ID to the variable in the dropdown, all that kind of stuff. Then I have a little bit of code. So I have some of the starting point here. Again, you must tag at least one sort of variable at fxml for Scene Builder to pick up the controller class. And then I sort of show the sort of layout here and the stuff that you pick and all that kind of stuff. Here's the code that we wrote, or at least it should be pretty close. If you want to mess around with something like this, you can start with just a start that sort of looks like this. Just make sure it has the correct location for the get resource. In this version, I just created a loader first and then did load. In the one you just saw on my Eclipse, I sort of do that all in one step. So of course that's totally up to you. And then here's the handler. So changing to the random number, which it looks like I did use that sort of version that I mentioned. So that's the code for that one. And then of course you change the FX ID here to my button and my text. So mess around with that a little bit. See if you can come up with maybe a more complicated one, a few extra buttons that do things, whatever it is that you need to do. Each scene, if you want to have more than one scene, so more than one sort of window with stuff, it does have to have separate controller classes. You can only control one of these GUIs per controller class. So if you want to have multiple windows that pop up or multiple scenes that you do stuff with, you will have to have multiple controller classes. So that's something to be aware of if that's what you want your game or your program to do. All right, so the take home from all this event-driven programming stuff is that it's a way of delegating responsibility for handling an event to a class. We make the sort of anonymous class, or we use a Lambda to do that. We delegate that responsibility and say, hey, when we do something, when we set on action, right, with our button, then do whatever this class says to do, and it'll run the handle of that class. And we just happen to be using anonymous classes and lambdas to make our life a little easier, make ourselves have a little bit of less sort of clutter in our project with extra files. JavaFX makes sort of extensive use of this. So as you've seen, the event handler interface, it's how you do it. So that's something that you want to make sure that you can do without too much trouble. And then you've sort of seen the basics to do this for sort of interactive GUIs, either via code or scene builder. So as we go through the rest of the semester, and I think I mentioned this sort of overall a couple times, as we go through the rest of the semester, likely during the labs, I'll have some sort of smallish one-off sort of mini lecture things where I show you a way to do something. So this upcoming week will be the sort of bouncing ball. We'll use the timeline class. We'll do a little bit of physics stuff in there, do a little bit of boundary checking, things like that could be helpful for a final project, for a multitude of final projects. We'll probably do one where we deal with some more image related things. How do you get a sprite onto the screen? How do you have it rotate around? All that kind of stuff. So you use the keys or something, or maybe we'll do some mouse click stuff as well. Maybe have you click somewhere and then a sprite moves to that location. We'll do some little things like that so that you can get a handle on how this stuff actually works, on how you can actually create sort of an interesting final project with it. So that'll be coming up for the labs. We do have like one graded lab left, I think, and one graded PA, so I'll give those out probably this upcoming week as well. Lab I might save for a couple weeks or something, but the last homework I'll give out this week most likely. So next time is the Java collections framework. So we're going to talk a little bit about some data structures. You will have a whole class on data structures if you're a CS major, and it's sort of a fun topic to do. I'm going to give you just some very basics so that when you go into a data structures class, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember sort of hearing about this linked list thing or this hash map thing. So we'll have a couple lectures where we sort of deal with some of this stuff, and I'll sort of show you, some of the performance things related to it, and sort of a few other individual pieces. So that is it for this lecture. So next time, Java collections framework.